If you've sewn any of my window hanging patterns before, you'll know that sometimes there's these odd shaped scraps that are left over from trimming off the pieces. These scraps don't usually fit into other kind of scrappy patterns because they don't make long strips and they don't make a lot of squares. But today I'm going to show you a super quick and easy project that will use up these odd shaped triangles. Welcome to Evita Studio. My name is Elizabeth and this is the Scrappy Star window hanging. So when I was going through all my scraps, I found a lot of these weird shaped pieces. This piece is cut off from the winter window hanging, which makes a really nice snowflake. So you can check the link below if you want to see that pattern. But this is a leftover piece, and this is kind of odd to work with. But I'm going to take these and turn these into roughly half rectangle triangles. So there's that seam in the middle, and I'm not even going to bother to unpick it. I'm just going to cut that out and make these roughly that size. And don't worry about any measuring at this point. So I have this kind of odd piece, but we're going to work with that. And then I have these pieces that are also offcuts, and I'm going to use these. So I'm going to take one of these light pieces and one of these dark, and I'm going to stitch them together on that long side with a pojagi reversible patchwork seam. So you can click on the link if you want to see how to do that seam. It makes a reversible seam, and I'm not going to do any measuring at this point. I'm just going to sew these together. And I have 4 of these and 4 of these. So I'm going to join them into 4 pairs. So now I have all 4 of these pairs stitched. And you'll notice that on one of the sides, there's 2 rows of stitching. And on the other side, there's only 1 row of stitching. That is just the way this technique goes. And don't worry about having all the rows of double stitching facing the same way. Just feel free to mix them up. That's just part of this technique, and it makes the reversible seam. So these pieces are reversible, and we want to be able to flip them around and move them freely in our piece without worrying about that seam. So now that I have them, we're going to trim these down so that they're the same size. So we're going to measure. It looks like we can do about 5 1/4 inches. This one's the narrowest, so 5 1/4 inches, and then probably 9 inches tall is what we can do. So I'm going to trim these all but down to the same size so that they're 5 1/4 inches by 9 inches. And I'm just going to make them that size. I'm not going to worry about trying to make sure that the seam goes right from corner to corner. The seam can be offset a little bit, not in the corners, and that's not going to matter. I'm just going to make them the same size. So you will have probably a different size depending on whatever size scraps you're using, whatever size seam you have. So just take these pieces and trim them all down so that they're the same size. So now these are all trimmed up. They're all the same size, even though they're not exactly identical. And now we want to make these into squares. So we're going to add another strip of background fabric onto the side to make it a square shape. Now the one thing to remember with these modern pojagi seams is that you cannot just add 1/4 inch to find your seam allowance. The seam allowances are different. They work differently than regular quilting seams. So add a little bit extra, like at least 1/2 inch, probably a bit more. And then after it's sewn together, then trim it down into the square. So I'm just going to add those pieces on now. So these pieces are all done. They're all squares, the same size. So now I'm going to lay them out in the arrangement that I want. And I'm going to put mine so that they look like a star, so they have these points coming out. But if you prefer, you could also make it look like a pinwheel. That's another option that works with these shapes. So play around with different arrangements, find the one you want, and then we're going to sew them together into a big piece. Now, when you join them, there is going to be a really thick seam right in the middle where all the pieces come together. So at that point, just stitch really slowly and maybe use a seam jumper to be able to go over that. But take your time and it should turn out okay. So now I have all these pieces joined into a star. And if you want, you could just finish it like this, just hem the edges and be done. But I found these fun orange strips, so I'm just gonna add a little small orange border around the edge. And I think that'll really set it off and look fun. So here's the piece with that little orange border added. Now all we're gonna do is hem the edge to finish it. So to do that, we'll just take the side, fold it down 1/4 of an inch and press, and then fold down another 1/4 of an inch and press, and top stitch just to hold that down. And do one side at a time, all 4 sides, and then we're done. It'll be ready to hang. So here's the piece all finished and ready to hang up in a window. You can adapt this idea for any different shapes and colors that you have. This will just get you started in being creative. If you have background pieces that are big enough, you can have just one solid square instead of adding on the extra piece. And the border is optional. So here's a piece. This one is super quick. It's just 4 squares put together. And here's another smaller one. Again, this one is just 4 squares put together. And then here's a tiny one. And this is small squares with a little border. There are a lot of different options. You can just have fun playing with your scraps and seeing how it works out. So this piece looks really nice, even just laying on the table. But you can see that the sun really is the secret ingredient to make this look like stained glass. And sometimes your fabrics will surprise you and look totally different once they're in the window. Even simple designs look beautiful. It's the seam technique that gives it the stained glass look. There's no black fabric used. It's just the seams are thick and so the light doesn't come through. Have fun playing with your own scraps and making your own Scrappy Star window hanging. For more patterns, ideas, and tutorials, check out ebitastudio.com.